Hello and welcome to Series 4 of Lawyers Coach. My name is Claire Rayson, and each episode of this podcast will feature myself or Oliver Hansard, both of us coaches and former lawyers, trying to find out what makes lawyers tick. We will be hearing from various guests and experts, and then at the end of each episode, we will both be reflecting on what they said. Lawyers Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. In this episode, Oliver Hansard is talking to Will Johnson, who is General Counsel of the BMW Group UK and Ireland. Will speaks to Ollie about life as a General Counsel and in particular the need for in-house lawyers to be proactive in managing their careers. Oliver starts by asking Will what attracted him to law in the first place.
Well, I did economics and politics as my first degree. That sort of involved elements of law in terms of international relations, and there were quite a lot of sort of live political issues around social justice. So I particularly enjoyed those elements. I enjoyed the course and studying generally. So I have to say I didn't have a sort of necessarily a burning desire to be a lawyer, but I particularly enjoyed those elements that did involve law, and going on to do law and the CPE was a bit of a natural progression. When I left uni, all I knew is I really wanted to travel. I went to South America, came back, did the CPE, and I suppose having done economics, I sort of gravitated towards commercial law and got a training contract at Freshfields. So that was the path into the law. So it was a very gradual one, really.
And did you enjoy your time at Freshfields?
I did. Yeah, I had 6 very happy years there. Great training, fantastic lawyers there, and a great range of work. It was a great time, and spent obviously most of the time in London, some time in Madrid. But I suppose after about 4 or 5 years qualified, I was realizing that it was really quite specialized, and you needed to specialize in a particular area. I did a lot on the IPOs and equity underwriting agreements with banks, and I sort of questioned whether I wanted a bit more, a slightly broader experience, and I wasn't certain, frankly, whether the life of a partner at Freshfields was sort of what I wanted in the long term. So I went on a secondment to GEC. I'd been actually to GEC as a trainee for a spell and went back, and that was a really interesting time. They were selling their defense business and moving into telecom. So they asked me if I wanted to stay, and yeah, I moved in-house. So it was an interesting role to move into. So yeah, I left Freshfields after about 6 years or so.
So they poached you. How were Freshfields about that?
I think they were okay because they were a big client, and having someone there was a good thing. I don't think they were necessarily thrilled, but it probably helped cement the relationship. I'd certainly hoped it would have done, and Freshfields were doing a lot of work at the time, so it worked, I think, both ways, and it felt like the right thing for my career at the time. So yep, I made the move.
And can you, looking back, kind of remember the major differences between that private practice role and then the life of an in-house lawyer? You know, what the big differences were.
You're client facing immediately in-house, so you've literally got the corporate finance team, the treasury team, right at your desk. So that was great. So the exposure to a really great set of people and real issues firsthand, rather than it sort of filtering through the partner to senior associate, was a big change and a refreshing one. And it was broader, you know. At Freshfields, I was just becoming more specialised, and I quite enjoyed the variety, frankly. And within just, you know, broader commercial work, but across the range. So I enjoyed that breadth. Actually, that's sort of what I was looking for, and being closer to the business. So yeah, it was a welcome change.
And then the route from GEC to where you are now at BMW, how did you navigate that pathway?
So it was fairly soon. So quite a few steps between now and GEC. So I GEC became Marconi, concentrated on telecoms pretty soon after I joined. The dot-com crash happened, and Marconi had a really difficult time. Over leveraged balance sheet and had to go into a full debt for equity restructuring, which was a very interesting time. I suppose over a course of 3 years, I probably learned more as a lawyer then than I had done prior to that, and probably since, in a way.
Wow.
Yeah, just in terms of it was a full corporate cardiac arrest in terms of the different stakeholders. So the creditors effectively assuming control, that interplay with shareholders, the interests of just different parts of the corporate entity were all in the mix, pension trustees, employees. So it was a very interesting time as a fairly junior lawyer to be right in the middle of that. And just had fantastic exposure working with very senior directors on some pretty material issues. So it was probably not an experience I'd want to repeat, in terms of it was a really tough time for the business. But I learned a huge amount as a lawyer, worked with some fantastic people, both in-house but externally. At Freshfields, working with partners there, and at Allen and Overy, Slaughter and May. It was a really interesting time.
And then from there, you moved to Ericsson, or was that all part of the flow of the corporate changes you were experiencing?
So what happened? Effectively, Marconi came through the debt for equity restructuring as a smaller business, and eventually it was probably just subscale for the industry at that point, and missed out on a big opportunity with one of its customers, and that business was sold to Ericsson at 2005. So I joined Ericsson then. Ericsson had also gone through a difficult time with the downturn in telecoms, and had let a large number of people go, and that included a legal team in the UK. So it was an interesting time to join Ericsson, help set up a legal team there, and I did different roles at Ericsson over a number of years, and then moved to BMW about 3 years ago. So it's been an interesting time, and I enjoyed Ericsson hugely, and BMW's been fantastic.
So what tips have you got for an in-house lawyer as they try to progress and manage their career after coming out of private practice?
So I think it's a different path in-house, no doubt about it. In private practice, you're probably slightly clearer in terms of the path to partnership. And I think the main thing is to make sure that you really think about the work you want to do, and the skills you want to acquire. To be honest, the company you work for won't necessarily make that decision for you. If you have a good boss or mentor, they may help you with that, but they're probably quite wrapped up in their issues supporting the board, or whatever part of the business they are. So I think it's really important to take ownership of the work you want to be doing, and give some thought to that. Don't drift, and try not to get sort of bogged down in doing too much of the same work. So in the companies I've worked at, there's been breadth to be able to go out and do different things. So at Marconi, I've very much said to the then CEO at the time, once we get through the restructuring, I wanted to do commercial work, and I took on that post restructuring and managed a team for the first time. based in Coventry and Liverpool. And that was a really good change from doing sort of probably corporate finance work for the first 10 years of my career. And so I've tried to sort of do different things, and that's helped, because when you advise boards and management committees, you want to try and have that breadth. So being a bit deliberate about that, and thinking about continuous development and what you want to do. So I probably 6 years ago now did the company secretarial qualification, which was fantastic. So that's what was ICSA, now the Corporate Governance Institute. Fantastic course, quite time consuming, but certainly a great help supporting boards since then. And also just, I think, investing in the network. So that's more than just having lots of LinkedIn connections. That's actually joining other in-house lawyer forums. So I joined a technology in-house lawyer forum, met some great people through that. And I think you soon appreciate just how much other lawyers in-house are doing similar things to you. And I think you learn a huge amount from that. So it's a bit of a mix, but through all of that, you build the skills just to sort of step forward, and that's certainly helped me in the different roles I've taken on.
And it sounds like through all that, you've been very active rather than passively sit back and just go where the company leads you. It sounds that at the right time, you've just taken a hold of things and really tried to direct what your future might be.
I think that's right, because as I said, the companies ultimately, they just want to have the legal work done, and they won't necessarily think of your career progression. And I think all of us as lawyers went into it interested in the law. Whatever route we took, there was an interest there, and that remains the case for me. I find what I do hugely interesting. It's very varied, and I've tried to just steer a path. So in different roles, I've done quite a mix, really. I probably, when I started out, hadn't done much litigation. I've now done a lot of that, a lot of data privacy, employment work, obviously a lot of commercial work at Ericsson and at Marconi. So trying to get that mix, I think, is ultimately what you want to get, because you'll need that as a general counsel, because the board and the management committee will want you to be able to sort of speak with confidence about quite a range of topics. Some of them may not be that legal, frankly. They could be just very commercial. They could just be, balancing the risk. What's the way forward? And I think if you've got that mix, you're quite well placed just to give them a view. And frankly, at the end of the day, that's what they want, is just a bit of a steer, left or right.
And there's a real mix. You've got that title, general counsel. There's the counsel side where you need that breadth of law knowledge, legal knowledge, and then the general, which is that application of it. And so how much law are you really doing these days?
Still quite a bit, actually. Probably more than you would think, in a way. At the end of the day, I need to speak to the board about the different boards and management committees that I support on legal topics, and to my boss in Munich. So there's a good amount of it. It's probably sort of particularly on the dispute side, regulatory authorities, obviously more recently COVID and Brexit. So there's a lot of legal work still, for sure, but we're a big business. So the UK business of BMW is sort of probably an 11 billion turnover business, sort of top to toe. There's 12 of us in the legal team, so as a small team, we support a huge range of different issues. We've got a number of production facilities. So we've got Rolls-Royce motor cars, we produce minis, engines up at Hams Hall, and other production plants. And we've got two big financial services businesses, fully regulated by the FCA, and a large sales business. So there's a big range of topics as a team we have to try and cover, and we divide it up, speak frequently, and try and cover it as best we can.
Yeah, just almost $1 billion each of revenue for you to manage. That's quite some risk. Wow.
Yeah.
So coming up today, 3 years at BMW, and pretty soon after coming in, you've got the COVID pandemic, which is a massive impact, I've no doubt, on the organisation. How did you deal with that, and how did that change the way in which the legal team operated?
So it was, there's nothing like a sort of crisis in a way to get the sort of the lawyers absolutely right at the elbow of the senior team, and COVID was no different. So it was a very busy time for us. Closing plants, last March, effectively there was a shutdown, and these plants are big machines to close and reopen, and we did that in sort of very quick time. So we were back up and running in the May. So I think we were sort of ahead of the curve, certainly on some of the comparators with plants elsewhere in the world. So that was busy. Retailers closed likewise. So there was a sort of big pivot to sort of towards the digital work. That was a big focus area. And then the office based staff, ourselves included, were sort of very much remote working, like most people. So I think we've had flexible working in the Farnborough office since, I think, before my time, 2015, if not before. So it was quite easy for the team to adapt to it. Everything happening online. So it was a change, but I think one we made quite sort of relatively easily. But it was just a crazy time, wasn't it? Sort of that March through June last year. But yeah.
And do you feel that the team working remotely could be just as effective as they were prior to COVID?
I think so. I think you've got great accessibility, through online. You can see when people are available in a bizarre way. I think the communication levels have almost sort of stepped up on one level. So I think in terms of effectiveness, I've not been concerned by that. Internal client feedback has been fantastic. The team have really stepped up across all different fronts, financial services, on employment, and all of the challenges with COVID. So I think we've been effective. We've had 3 new joiners in the team, which that was quite interesting. People, one of whom had to join from overseas. That was a challenging time. Just the logistics of getting everyone set up and making sure everyone was happy. But I think over time, it's well over a year now, isn't it, since this has all started. Right, yeah. And I think particularly for the sort of junior lawyers, when I sort of think back when I was starting out on my career, just quite how much you learned from being in those, you'll remember, Ollie, sort of when you were at Clifford Chance and in different roles in-house, you learn a huge amount from just being with being
in the room, being in the same room as a partner or a senior assistant.
Exactly.
Absolutely.
How do they deal with really difficult situations, really difficult sort of moments in meetings, disappointment, adversity, and when you think back, actually, I have been very lucky to work with some fantastic lawyers, some brilliant general counsels, some brilliant external counsel, where you just think, God, they handled that situation. That was difficult. And the stamina of people, and just the calmness with which some people deal with difficult situations. You learn a lot, as you say, from being in the room. And I think over time, you can't do that online. Or if you can, it's a different experience. So I think gravitating back is very much what we want to do. Obviously subject to being allowed to do so, really.
And do you think people have changed in the way they behave with one another, interact with one another in this virtual world?
I think there's probably a slight subconscious sort of change, in the sense, you know, at the end of the day, this is a health crisis, isn't it? And, you know, we're a small team. People have had challenging situations, you know, friends and family. And so I think we're supportive of each other. People have had to take time out, myself included. And you really sort of, and people have stepped in and looked after each other. So I'm not sure sort of people sort of have a measure of kindness in corporates, but certainly my experience over the last year is there's been a lot of kindness within the team, within BMW, towards each other, and you know, myself included. And that builds strong bonds. You don't forget that sort of support when things are a little bit tougher. So I think we've tried to do that within the team, and I think that's sort of a broader concept as well. So it's probably a slightly a different emphasis over the last 12 months, you know, whilst trying to get all the work done as well. You know, it's there's been no let up in that front.
Oh, I'm sure. And then you as a leader, do you think you've learned new skills over the last 18 months or so?
Yeah, you know, I think so. I think it's you know, there certainly has been a sort of focus and on well-being. So there's probably been that element of it. So, you know, we have more of a sort of community element to team meetings, certainly when we weren't getting together at all, just checking in, seeing how everyone was, doing a team quiz, just various things just to make sure people were okay. It's very easy with the volume of work just to be very transactional and just plow through and see where we are on different projects, different cases. So I think there's been a bit of a deliberate sort of step towards just making sure everyone's okay, because we haven't seen each other sort of face to face so much. So that's probably a slight change.
And do you think that will endure? Do you think we'll keep that with us, and that'll be a positive outcome of all this madness?
I think so. You know, that empathy is an important skill set, isn't it? It's like I said, you people value people actually caring for them in the workplace, not just their work output. And we live busy work lives, but there's a lot of other things going on in the wider world. And I think it's always really important for people in the team to just know that you know, I'm caring for how their work is going, but also the context within they're having to do that work in, and it's been pretty different over the last 12 months.
And then how about your external counsel? Have they stepped up to the mark? Have they been able to adapt to these new ways of workings and the additional demands on you as a client?
Yeah, I think so. You know, like sort of all sort of advisory teams, they've adapted to remote working. Certainly the firms I've spoken to, they've it's been a fairly sort of easy change for them to make. You know, I don't know, but I expect there's been more time for sort of transactional work. You know, business development in those areas are probably just, they've not been possible, have they? So they've probably had to do less of that. I don't know, but I think the way they've worked has been effective. I think naturally things have been a bit more transactional because we've just not been able to sort of meet up face to face, but we've had some very good training sessions, which, you know, we would normally do obviously in the offices of external counsel, but we've tried to sort of use those sessions to sort of have a wider discussion, which probably slightly different this year to prior years. So I think external counsel have adapted well, but it's going to be interesting, because I think getting back together is going to be important, because as we said earlier, there is no substitute to having that FaceTime when you can.
And is there anything you could say to your external counsel, take this forward, keep doing these new things that were great things you learned during the pandemic that we'd love you to keep going?
Certainly the accessibility's been superb, and I guess that's partly just because people haven't been buried in meetings, and to the extent they have, they can ping you an IM straight back, and that's been good. So the accessibility's been good.
Sounds like they've never stopped working, which might not necessarily be a good thing for them, though.
No, and I think, at the end of the day, there's probably been less commute time. I'm not sure that's translated into shorter working hours. In fact, I think that's been one of the disciplines we've tried to sort of instill, is just to make sure people end the day rather than just carrying on, taking breaks and exercising, because without sort of people must do what they want to do. But I've certainly, in the first part of the pandemic, it was very easy just to carry on late into the night, and actually you need to stop and recharge. And I think I'm not sure it's entirely different in private practice. You can just carry on with the chargeable hours, can't you? So yeah, there needs to be an end to the day.
And then one final question, Will, is what, as you look back your careers so far, and then maybe forward a little, what would you say success would look like from a career perspective?
I think doing interesting work with great people, and I think look, there's obviously the reward of that is really important, because you need to spend time doing what you enjoy, and I think look, in-house, your career sort of takes, it's as we spoke about earlier, it goes in different directions, and that's partly sort of directed by the company you work for, and you need to take ownership of your career. But working on different and interesting projects with great people is important. And if you're not, over a sustained period of time, think about that, because you may want to sort of look to change the work you're doing. And I think that is the key criteria for me, because I've enjoyed all the different roles I've had and the work I've done, but it's that variety, and it's really important.
Well, it's been an absolute pleasure talking to you. Thank you ever so much for your time and for coming onto the pod.
Ollie, thanks very much. It's been great being with you. Thanks.
So that was Oliver Hansard speaking to Will Johnson, General Counsel, BMW Group UK and Ireland. And Oliver joins me now. So Oliver, an interesting reflection there about needing to take control of your own career. And I wonder how many in-house lawyers realise that's needed, and make that shift to being in a place where they need to do that.
Absolutely. That's one of the biggest challenges of going into an in-house role is making that mind shift from the core business is no longer the law, and you're a service department into the business in the main, and therefore all sorts of things are going to be left up to you. Obviously there's the delivering the legal service, but also that whole career development aspect and skills development aspect. Absolutely, for all in-house lawyers, unfortunately, it's left to them to navigate.
And I thought it was interesting what he said there about trying to find a mentor. And I think that's a really useful tip that he's given there, and perhaps looking, even outside of the organization that you find yourself in, to look for that mentor.
I think that's absolutely right, but also maybe outside the law as well, because then what you need to do in that in-house journey, and obviously these are things I've experienced, are that you need to think, what are the business needs and how can my set of skills serve those needs? So as Will there talking about, yes, there's that legal aspect, but sometimes it's just the practical and commercial support that the board might need or the clients might need that's critical. So getting that external mentoring outside the law, even outside the business, I'm sure can be really useful for anyone trying to make the most of that in-house legal career.
And in terms of your experience, where would you ask people to start if they're, someone listening thinking, well, that's great, but how on earth do I go about finding a mentor? What would you recommend to them?
I think the best thing for anyone to do is to talk to as wide a range of people as they possibly can, because all our careers and all our experiences obviously are a real kind of pick and mix of different conversations and experiences. So meet with people, understand as many different views as you possibly can, and if one of those turns into a mentoring relationship, fantastic, because you could find that mentor from absolutely any direction.
I think that's great advice to leave it on today. Thank you ever so much for talking to Will for us, and I'm looking forward to catching up with you again soon.
Absolute pleasure. Thanks very much, Claire. You keep well.
Lawyers Coach is brought to you by Client Talk and Hansard Coaching. If you're enjoying this series, please rate us on your podcast provider so that others can find us. If you're a lawyer and would like to take part in Lawyers Coach, please visit our website lawyercoach.co.uk for further details. And you can also join the conversation on our LinkedIn group Lawyers Coach. If there are any topics you'd like to hear us discuss, then just get in touch.